Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic turnout this has been. Last year in Las Vegas, we sat 70 people at the banquet. So we've grown by more than 50% in that 1 year. I never like long speeches, so I'm not going to give one. I just want to say welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming. We're so glad to see everybody. It's been a wonderful event. The hotel has been fantastic. The weather has been fantastic. This morning's event was incredible. He has covered wars in the American military. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his series on catastrophically wounded soldiers and Marines. Please welcome Mr. David.
Who started out by saying, I don't like long speeches. Also, I'm sorry I missed your event today. It sounded like it went really well. Somebody said it went off perfectly, and I was glad to hear that because things going perfectly is not something I've always associated with the U.S. military. In fact, I think it was a German general after World War II who was debriefing by the Allies, was asked why he thought that the Allies had won, and he said, well, pretty simple. As you know, war is chaos, and the American Army practices it on a daily basis. So the other thing I was thinking about when I was driving over here was a speech, or not a speech, but I guess remarks that John F. Kennedy gave in 1962 when he gathered a bunch of Nobel laureates to the White House for dinner. And so there were, you know, the world's most renowned scientists and philosophers, and just an incredible gathering of talent, which he said this is probably the most amazing gathering of talent ever, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. Okay, JFK went. So I was thinking, you know, I'm so honored to be asked here to speak to you tonight, and so I wanted to say that this is probably the greatest gathering of people dedicated to the idea of service than, and then I stopped because I couldn't think, than what? Mother Teresa or what? But anyway, I want to say thank you for your service. I sure acknowledge all that you have done and do, and thank you for your service, and welcome home. This idea of service, because you folks, men and women who served during Vietnam, did something that I think, as an outsider, I look at what you've done, and it seems to me rather extraordinary, and maybe you don't see it the way I do, but the way I see it is that you lived on a daily basis according to a set of values that are, you know what those values are? It's honesty, it's doing the right thing when no one's looking, it's the idea of responsibility to your fellow whatever. So all of those things, and you know, the Army has something, I think it still has something called the 9 Army values, you know what those are. But the interesting thing to me is that you live them on a daily basis. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. When my wife asked me a couple of days ago, what are you going to talk about? And when I told her, she said, do not say that. Don't say that. So, thanks, Beth, and I'm going to say it. And what I'm going to say is that we have so much to learn from you about this idea of living your values. And I want to urge you to be engaged. I know a lot of you probably already are, and I know that so many veterans volunteer with service organizations, and you do so much. I just want to reiterate, we need you out here in civilian America. You might have noticed the last couple of weeks on Capitol Hill, there wasn't a lot of what I would call high-value behavior. And no matter what side of all that you come out on, I think we need the example of quiet responsibility and service that you all have lived. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to just take a little diversion and tell you a little bit more about myself. So I've been a war correspondent for almost my entire career. I've been scared almost all of that time. I am the last person you would ever expect to have done this. I grew up in a Quaker family in a quiet, safe suburb of New York City. And when I grew up, we didn't know any military people, and we were pretty sure if we did know any, we wouldn't like them. Because we knew that war was immoral, and anyone who took part in it was also immoral. So that's the environment I grew up in. And when I became 18 and had to register for the draft, I registered as a conscientious objector. And when I got drafted, I served 2 years in a civilian job, a service job. And so that worked out okay. And then I was looking around for something to do. I was going to night school to finish off my college. And so I became a journalist, but it wasn't out of some high-minded thing about the First Amendment, the people's right to know, or anything like that. It was, I met these guys who were Time magazine correspondents. So this would have been, I don't know, 67, 68, something like that. And these guys were the most glamorous creatures I'd ever seen. They were all handsome, they wore beautiful clothes, they went to fabulous restaurants, drank incredibly exotic drinks, which, coming from a Quaker non-alcoholic household, I was like, and they had wonderful stories to tell, and they squired around beautiful women, and I was like, I want that. Actually, I want that. And so I worked at it, and pretty soon I was a Time magazine foreign correspondent, and I was sent to Africa, where the only story that anyone was interested in the magazine was war, so I went off to cover war. It's hard to believe now, but it was only recently that I thought, I might have had some training to do that. It might have been a good idea for me to figure out how to do that, or to get some lessons in how to behave, and maybe some gear, like a first aid kit. Never occurred to me. I just went out and, like Mr. Magoo, there was always somebody to grab me at the last minute, or push me down, or say, don't go there, don't do that. So I survived 4 years, and then I came back to Washington and covered the Pentagon, and that meant covering the Secretary of Defense, and so I traveled everywhere with SecDef, and that was fun. By the way, the glamour had worn off a long time before that idea was gone, but I was starting to see some value in this, and then I got tired of traveling with SecDef because we were going to the same places and I was writing the same stories. And I discovered that the U.S. military, this is hard to believe, I didn't realize this, but spends a lot of time out in the field training. And you could go out there as a journalist and hang out with them. And so I was like, wow, this is way more fun than having a desk at the Pentagon and all that stuff. So for about 10 or 15 years, almost everything I did was out in the field with the military. And this was phenomenally interesting and a real high learning curve for me. So I learned, trauma first aid. I learned what to do in an ambush, where to run in a mortar attack, when not to run, when to duck, and I got all this really great knowledge. And so that has served me well, that kind of field craft that you guys also learn, I'm guessing, on the job. The other thing I learned, though, is something I want to talk a little bit more about tonight. And I only learned it after I've been covering the military for about 15 years. And I embedded with the Marine Battalion for a year. I just went and lived with these guys for a year. And we went to Somalia and we got shot at. That was when the Black Hawk Down was happening. And so we got shot at by the early versions of Al-Qaeda, who weren't very good, but scary. And that's where I learned this stuff about values. So I hadn't really gotten it before. And I'd heard about the Army values and the Marine Corps values, and I knew all the slogans, but I didn't realize how much it drove daily life until coming back from Somalia, the ship stopped in Spain for Liberty. We went on Liberty, and we all got hugely drunk a couple of nights in a row. And on the last night, came time to go back to the ship, and my best buddy, who was a staff sergeant, was really drunk and cantankerous. And I said, hey, Norm, we got to go back to the ship, we're going to miss curfew. And he goes, I ain't going back there, let me alone. And I said, Norm, come on, you're already in trouble. We got to get back to the ship. We're going to miss curfew. And he goes, I ain't going, no. So I just sort of gently slugged him with my forearm, because I'm a Quaker, I wasn't going to hit him in the face. and he was drunk enough that sort of staggered him back. I put him over my shoulder and carried him back to the ship, which was, I don't know how, it seemed like forever. The next morning, I thought, what just happened? I never would have done that as a civilian, but I had internalized this idea of responsibility to your fellow, in this case, not my fellow Marine, but close enough, to your buddy, to your friend, to somebody in your community. And without thinking, I did the right thing when no one was looking. I was like, this is powerful stuff. So let me leave that there, and let me talk a little bit about this generation of Americans who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I spent a year with the amputees, and not just amputees, but the burn guys, and people who are pretty severely, catastrophically wounded. So in your war, if you were wounded, you had about a 70% chance of living. There were a lot of people in Vietnam and previous wars who died of their wounds. And in this war, in Afghanistan and Iraq, that has changed dramatically because of, partly because every soldier Marine is trained as a combat lifesaver, which means they have pretty good, rudimentary, but pretty darn good trauma first aid training and carry the stuff with them. And all kinds of other improvements, which I can talk about later, in getting people to sophisticated medical help quickly and on the whole chain, and experimental surgery, and the stuff that's been done is amazing. But the upshot is that almost everybody who is wounded on the battlefield now lives, which is phenomenally terrific. The flip side, though, is that many of those people are wounded beyond imagining. So you have a guy who's lost both legs and one arm. This is a guy I know, a young Marine, 20 years old. Lost both legs and one arm, and his remaining arm is pretty mangled. And so guys like that, it doesn't stop there, because think of it. You're walking along and an IED explodes underneath you, so likely it damages or destroys your genitals, drives up into your, I don't have to describe to you what happens. So the damage is catastrophic, and we're saving those people. I'm sorry, military medicine is saving these people. So I started off getting to know these men and women, thinking, wouldn't it be better off if they died? What kind of life really could you have? And I very quickly found out, no, no, they're very happy to be alive. In fact, most of them celebrate a live day, which is the day they didn't die. And they're just, by and large, wonderful folks to be around, because something happens when you're so catastrophically wounded and you don't die. It seems to infuse them with, I don't know, joie de vivre, I guess, thankfulness that they're alive, and something else which I'll talk about in a minute. So there are, I think, about 16 or 18,000 of these people, and they will require a lot of care for the rest of their lives. Then we have the PTSD, traumatic brain injury people, and this is many, many more, tens of thousands. And military medicine is getting pretty good at diagnosing PTSD, which they hadn't invented when you folks came back, as you know. And so they can diagnose inside a narrow definition of PTSD, trauma. And then you have the traumatic brain injury people who are also many, many thousands of people. So there is another category of people coming back. And then almost everybody else, I think, comes back from one or more deployments profoundly changed. And you know what I'm talking about here. A lot of the change is for the good. You know, the camaraderie, the pride in service, the pride of what they've accomplished. And a lot of it's not so good. You know, I know a lot of guys who went over very spiritual and came back thinking, you know, God does not exist. And, you know, and if he did, how come he's allowing all this bad stuff to happen? Or, you know, the president told me this was going to be a noble thing that we were doing. It turns out not so noble, and we were going to go fix it. And guess what? We didn't fix it. Not only that, they hate us, and it's, you know, it's all a bunch of crap. And there's so this generation of returning veterans, and this is what my wife said, don't say this, they need you. They need all of us, but especially you guys who have lived through that experience and understand this whole idea of living guided by those values and doing those things which bring pride and satisfaction to you, but which you know, me looking on the outside thinking, wow, you know, that guy really took some responsibility for someone else. And when this person is you know, engaged in service when he doesn't have to be, he's given so much already, and I know you all have. I came across something really interesting on Friday. And I was doing some research on a project I'm trying to write on something called moral injury. And that's this thing, this more vague thing that I'm talking about, when people come back from a war zone and they're just somehow dissatisfied or feel lost. And this was some research which showed that if you are suffering from trauma, and it's, you know, it's a real deep hurt inside, that the people who recover the fastest are those who are helping others. Think about that. And it is amazing. You know, I read that and I had to get up and walk around our bureau down in Washington going, oh, I don't believe this. Because what I always thought of as a sort of goody thing turns out to be a medically helpful thing. The idea of service, really astonishing. So my message tonight is really simple. There's a lot of people out there who need our engagement, and a lot of it is happening at the community level. And let me just, I'm sorry if I'm doing a long speech here, but I'm almost done. So I thought a little about the VA, and I spent a lot of time with the VA, and I sat with the claims processors, and I sat with surgeons and watched, you know, I just spent a lot of time with them. And here's my take on the VA. You guys may have a completely different take, but again, I'm looking at them as an outsider, not someone who's dependent on them for redressing my grievances. So at the Richmond, Virginia Polytrauma Center, it's a big VA hospital where they treat a lot of these catastrophically wounded guys. The people who work there are, I'm not exaggerating, they are world class. Because if you go look at the scientific and research literature on things like traumatic brain injury or polytrauma. Polytrauma means, you know, guys who have amputations plus traumatic brain injury plus they're missing their spleen plus a hand, and, you know, guys who are really catastrophically wounded. The best people in the world are working right there at the VA hospital. And they could be making millions on the outside. But they're working there because they're just dedicated. And the nurses, oh my gosh, the nurses who work in the psychiatric wards, unbelievable, you know, tending to guys who are in comas for years. That's just unbelievable. So there's that part of the VA. And I've, you know, I just come across them everywhere. Then there's the programs that the VA has. And for example, I spent a lot of time this summer immersed in the whole world of veterans and military suicides. And as you know, this is just a horrible national disgrace that we let so many people take their own lives. And the VA has spent a lot of time on this, and they also have the best people in the world working on this program, and they've devised a lot of resources which are terrific. They're I hate to use the phrase again, but they're world class. The resources that they offer for people at risk of suicide are unparalleled. Here's the problem, though. They've got to design programs that will fit everybody. And so as a result, each program doesn't fit anybody in particular. It's like, you know, when you need a bunch of nails and you go to Home Depot and you gotta buy what's hanging on the shelf in those annoying little bubble wrap things. You can't reach in a bin and get exactly what you want. You have to take what they got. And it's sort of like what the VA has. So if you're a National Guard, so I wrote about a guy like this, a National Guard soldier who came back from Iraq. Yeah, it was Iraq. Came back from Iraq, and he should have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, but he slipped through the cracks. And he went to the VA to try to get help, but he said it just didn't, nothing worked for me. And that's so common. And it's not the VA's fault. I think they're just too big. They have to be. So here's what's happening. The whole effort to integrate veterans back into American society, civilian society, is moving to communities. I want to tell you about two things really quick, which I find super interesting, and I'm going to be writing about in the next couple of weeks. There's a nonprofit called The Mission Continues. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a fabulous organization. I don't speak for them, and it's one of many, many that are really good. But what they do is they take veterans who are struggling to kind of find themselves, and they plug them into jobs at other nonprofits and pay for them. They're called fellowships. And it's really kind of neat. They keep a close eye on them. They have to write papers and do all these sort of projects, but it's like a fellowship to help them sort of reorient themselves to this world of service. Well, that's fine, but they were talking about themselves and they thought, we got to do something at a community level. So what they're starting is service platoons of Iraq and Afghan veterans. They're starting one in Washington, D.C., and next Saturday I'm going to go on a work project with them. So they got a platoon. It's a standing platoon. These guys belong to this platoon, and they find service projects to do in conjunction with a corporation, and I think next week they're doing it with Applebee's, and a local nonprofit, and inviting people in a community to join in. So we're going up to an orchard that grows apples, I think, for a food kitchen in Washington, paid for by Applebee's and organized by the Mission Continues and the work done by this platoon. This is fabulous stuff. This is, it's unbelievable because anybody in Washington can sort of join in. This is great. And this is a way for, civilians and veterans to start getting to know each other again. The other thing I wanted to mention just really quickly is a new company called Unite Us. And it was founded just a couple months ago by two veterans who are like technical computer whizzes. And I couldn't believe it, and he was describing this to me. So it's a website, and if you go on the website and you are a Vietnam veteran and you did helicopter avionics in Vietnam in 1967, and you live in Iowa City, Iowa, and you want to find other guys who were serving at that base at that time and have successfully filed Agent Orange claims and are Lutherans, hit the button go, you plug all that into the website, and up pops 15 guys who meet that criteria in your neighborhood. This is amazing. So again, it enables people to sort of get together at a community level. If you're a corporation, say you run a small machine shop in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and you're looking for 3 veterans who, with the following qualifications, who will work for this much money and are willing to, or already live in Tuscaloosa, hit the button and there are your 3 guys. This is just phenomenally good, but the interesting thing is it's not a national, you can't search nationally. You can only search in, you know, in your neighborhood or your town or your city. So those are two interesting things that are happening on the community now. And again, you know, I just want to say, my wife notwithstanding, you have so much to give because you get this idea of living your values on a daily basis. I don't mean on a daily basis. You know what I mean? The things that you do routinely are built on those kinds of values. And maybe you don't even think about it. But standing on the outside and watching what you guys have done and do, I can see it. And we need that. So I just want to close on that note. And please, if you have questions, I'll be around all evening. Please come and ask me. And thanks again for inviting me here.